Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this webinar about tracking the COVID-19 recovery. We'll be looking at regions, industries, and occupations. So just a little background. My name is Chmura. I'm the CEO and Chief Economist at Chmura Economics and Analytics. We're blessed to have many talented people with us that have over the years been making models and analysis that prove to be very useful during times like these. So just again, some background on who Chmura is. Bottom line, we're here to help communities thrive. And so we provide labor market data and other data and analysis so that our clients can make informed decisions, again, to help their communities thrive. We were founded back in 1998, and we have offices in Richmond and Cleveland. There are about 45 of us, mainly economists, data scientists, statisticians, and business professionals who care about helping your community to grow. We're driven by our client satisfaction, and so we have a roadmap of items that many of you are JobsEQ users. We have a roadmap of items that we're putting on JobsEQ. Many of them are requests that come from our users. And also on the consulting side, we often go beyond what the statement of work calls for to make sure that our clients are satisfied. So bottom line, excellence is our first priority, and customer service and data quality are extremely important to us. So with that, let's turn to this webinar in terms of what we'll be talking about. 4 parts. First, the national economy and how the nation comes out of this COVID-19 has a big impact on underpinning how regions perform, how industries perform, and what occupations see the most growth or are not in as much demand. So on the economy side, we're looking at stage 1 where we had the supply shock. So what we mean by that is there was no supply. You couldn't go to restaurants because they were closed, or the clothing stores or the furniture stores. There was no supply for you to go and purchase. But then in stage 2, we have the demand shock where states have started to open up, but people are cautious, especially those that have high risks, are staying at home. So we're still social distancing. I have some good news in this webinar. Um, we'll be looking at some data where we're seeing improvement. In our most likely scenario, we still have a vaccine not coming until the first quarter of 2022. That's widely in 2022. But we've been hearing some good things about the potential for a vaccine to come earlier, perhaps as early as early 2021. So when the vaccine comes is going to be the game changer, and that's what's going to make the most difference in terms of this economy taking off and starting to grow like it did before COVID-19. So just again, going over how we're seeing this shock play out through the economy. And in stage 1, the difficulty, of course, with COVID-19 is that people are infectious before the symptoms show up. And then we have this exponential spread of the virus, which has caused all of this non-essential businesses to close in all states. And we were all asked to stay home if we didn't have to go out. And this lasts up to 3 months through May. And again, this is the assumptions that we're looking at through the remainder of this presentation, but I'll give the other scenario. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. So in terms of how this has played out, of course, here's the March employment data that came out, and we saw down 700,000, which was a surprise because the survey occurs in the middle of the month. It occurs the week where the 12th falls. And when you look back at the Great Recession, you can see that in this 1 month from COVID-19, we almost got to as negative as the last recession. Fast forward to April, and we had this huge decline of 20,500,000 people losing their job during April. Now, tomorrow, we're going to see the May numbers come out. And the consensus forecast among economists is for an 8.5 million decline. So we're going to be looking at something about here. Good news there that the decline is not as great. That's dropping off. The unemployment rate this particular month in April was 14.7%. And there are alternative views of unemployment that economists look at. And the official one is the U3. So this one was 14%. Here you see the last two recessions. And the green one is one where it takes into account people who are forced to work part-time but would prefer to work full-time, as well as people who are marginally attached, meaning that they're not looking for work right now, but if you were to offer them a job, they would take it. And so you can see that that number for the U6 unemployment rate has skyrocketed compared to the last two recessions that we were in. Here, now I'm showing it to you for the last 4 months so that you can better see what a large increase that we saw over this past month in terms of that U6. Again, the official unemployment rate that we hear about in the newspaper all the time is 14.7, but that U6 with the marginally attached and part-time workers is 22.8%. Here, another look at the labor force. We had a huge decline of 2.7 percentage points over the last 2 months. And that is, those people have dropped out of the labor force. They're not looking for work. And notice it compared to the last recession. In fact, during the last recession, considered the Great Recession, we saw a 2 percentage point decline over that entire period of the recession. Whereas here, we're seeing a 2.5 percentage point decline in only 2 months. So again, this came on us very dramatically. And as we've talked about in previous webinars, there was nothing fundamentally wrong with the economy as we went into this COVID-19 lockdown. The better way to think of it is that we're going through a natural disaster like a snowstorm that's forcing us all to stay at home for a few months. So what is the outcome in terms of real GDP? We saw first quarter GDP come out. Actually, it was revised from 4.8 down to negative 5%. Our forecast is for an 18.4% annualized decline in the second quarter. Then we see growth starting in the third quarter, and in the fourth quarter, some fairly strong growth, with the unemployment rate peaking in the third quarter at 17.6. Now, under the other scenario where we see people coming back quicker, we see some more treatments coming online for the COVID-19, we see the economy picking back up quicker, 8.3% here and 5.3% in the fourth quarter. Some economists, in particular the CBO, is looking for a 21% gain, annualized gain in the third quarter, but their second quarter decline is much deeper, a 40% annualized decline in the second quarter. What does that look like in terms of graphically? So here you see our forecast, again, down 5% for the first quarter. We're looking for down almost 20% in the second quarter, and then we're going to start to see increases after that. Now, these numbers are annualized, meaning that we're looking at this occurring over 4 quarters, but obviously we're not going to see this much of a decline over 4 quarters. So the real drop is somewhere around 4 to 5% for the quarterly drop in output. But then again, we take that number and annualize it, and it comes up to nearly 20%. As I said earlier, the CBO is looking for this to be a 40% drop. And basically, we economists are looking at what the medical epidemiologists are saying in terms of how this COVID-19 will move through the economy. But some economists making assumptions on more people staying at home, not coming back as quickly. And although our economic assumptions all vary, the one thing we are all seeming to agree on at this point is that it will be sharp, it will be short, but it won't be sustained in terms of GDP. So moving now to stage 2, here we're looking at the demand shock. This is where states are lifting restrictions, but not all industries are fully operational. And again, it's going to be the vaccine that we need to see before we see the economy coming back to pre-COVID levels. Regional issues are going to vary depending on the spread of COVID-19 and also the type of industries in the region, and we'll go over that more specifically in a couple minutes. Again, the stage 2 demand shock, the public needs to feel safe. So the more testing and tracing we have, that will help. And when we get to the occupations, you're going to see that states are putting in place more testing and tracing in terms of people with those kind of skills. More effective treatments, again, could help reduce the social distancing, and the vaccine will be the game changer. So for the rest of this presentation, we're assuming that the vaccine doesn't become widely available in the US until the first quarter of 2022. Typically, it takes decades to develop a vaccine, but most of the experts are telling us that they expect something to become available mid-2021, and some now even starting to say could be the end of this year, which would then maybe make it widely available early next year. In terms of this demand shock, again, most states are starting to open up, so we're looking at the recovery starting in June, but because we've had such massive declines in April and May, in terms of GDP growth, that's why we're looking at something so negative, even though June is going to show a little growth. States, again, are lifting restrictions at a different pace, but even so, we still have social distancing, and the recovery is going to vary based on the industries that you have in your region. So a couple more real-time charts of what we're seeing in terms of the data that's come out. And basically good news. Layoffs are continuing, but at a slower rate. So layoffs are a leading indicator. As you lay off individuals, you're not hiring people. And so the layoffs coming down is good news. Another piece of good news is continuing unemployment claims. So these are people who are getting unemployment on a week after week basis, and we're starting to see that decrease. Another piece of good news is that 78% of those people who are unemployed are saying that they're on a temporary layoff, that it's not a permanent layoff. That's good news because those people we'd expect will be coming back into the economy in the months ahead. Another piece of somewhat good news, well, on the one side, bad news in terms of consumption. So this is consumer purchases of retail, services, durable goods. Overall spending by the consumer fell over 15% in April. But on the other hand, the good news on this chart is income. Income jumped over 10% from a year ago, and that's because of the CARES Act increased the amount of unemployment benefits that individuals got. So this is a transfer payment from the federal government to individuals. I believe it was Bank of America, their president that I heard interviewed this past week, and he was saying that in terms of balances and checking accounts, that right now they're seeing checking accounts 20% or so higher than what is typical. And the good news there is that so people who are getting paid unemployment or are staying at home are not spending right now, but when the economy opens up, again, nothing fundamentally wrong with the economy, they'll be going out and spending if they feel safe. So good news that that we have the cash flow with many households. Now, the PPP has been very helpful, and here we modeled for you total employment. This is actual total employment coming down through the second quarter, but based on the businesses that were helped with PPP and the data that we have, we're estimating that another 5 million people would have lost their jobs if we didn't have the payroll protection program. So certainly that has helped mute the decline that we're seeing from COVID-19. So now let's shift over to looking at various industries. And by the way, feel free to ask questions throughout. You can put in questions, and then Avery will send them to me and we'll answer those. And also this webinar will be available. The slides will be sent to you later this afternoon. And then finally, we're going to continue to do these webinars as we receive more information and trying to provide some good data to our clients and then others who attend as well to help through this uncertain time. So variation by industry. It's this here we're looking at employment, and this is looking very different than GDP. GDP, we go into recession, we come out very quickly. Employment, it's going to be very different, and it varies greatly by industry. So restaurants, retail, entertainment, and lodging, employment remains half the pre-COVID level throughout the year by the time we get to the end of the year, a slow recovery. But on the other hand, things like utilities, professional services, company headquarters where people are working from home, employment is back to 90% pre-COVID by the fourth quarter. Some companies are going out of business, and so in some industries, we're not going to see, or sectors, we're not going to see employment get back to 100% for quite a while. At this point, we don't have good data on bankruptcies. That usually comes in with a pretty good lag. And again, under the most likely scenario, we don't expect to reach the pre-COVID employment levels until the third quarter of 2022. That's quite a ways off. If we do see a if we do see some treatments and a vaccine sooner than what we're expecting, then clearly we'll see employment coming back much faster. And the payroll protection program is playing an important role in the recovery. So beginning now with some industries, here to orient you on this, we're looking at the major sectors in terms of two-digit NAICS. So for example, manufacturing is a two-digit, but we did this analysis at a four-digit level. So for example, the automobile industry is has a different impact in terms of employment than furniture or chemical manufacturing. But then we took it back up to this level to give you the averages for the overall industry. So it's indexed to the beginning. So employment was indexed to 100 at the start of COVID-19. And so the way to read this is that here in this particular industry, which is arts and entertainment, we're seeing employment drop off 80% from the total of what it was at the beginning of COVID when COVID-19 started. And then on the other hand, you see it coming back slowly. Similarly with accommodation and food services, not as much of a decline, but clearly a very large decline. Now I'm going to sort of peel back this onion here and take off some of the industries so you can see in more detail. This red is now other services, a 25% loss. Other services would be things like getting your haircut or photographers or the laundromat. The next one up here in green is retail trade. And again, that varies greatly by industry or by the type of retail we're looking at. Clearly, grocery stores not off as much, but department stores, for the most part, fully closed. On this next slide here, we're looking at wholesale trade in red, and the drop-off again now only about 13% of total employment lost. And the orange is the information industry. Green is healthcare. And now notice here, we're actually looking at healthcare going beyond and growing beyond its pre-COVID level, given the demographics in society, is why we would expect that to continue to grow. And then finally, here in red, you're seeing manufacturing. And notice that manufacturing, once it gets to almost back to its COVID levels. It starts to decline. That's where our forecast kicks in, where we continue to expect to see productivity gains in manufacturing that cause that decline. But on the other hand, now that we've gone through this crisis, we may see some reshoring that pushes this back up above pre-COVID levels, pharmaceuticals and other manufacturing coming back to the US. And the education sector is in yellow. So you can see the decline again, not as great as in some of the other industries. So now going to the regional level, again, here's a slide that you've seen before if you've been in our webinars, and we have a blog where we're showing you this information. And here, again, we're showing you the 2-digit level, but when we did our analysis, we looked at a 4-digit level, so very detailed industries. And we looked at the percent decline in employment for all of those industries, and then we applied that to each of these counties. But we use the US as a base of 100. So if the county is this light colored, you're seeing less of a decline in employment as the counties that are red, which are seeing a greater decline in employment than the nation overall. And this is rank ordered. So again, accommodation and food services seeing the greatest declines, and then headquarters, active military, professional scientific seeing the least decline because many of those can work from home, and of course military having to report because they're a crucial industry. So now some additional information that we're looking at, and this is some information that's going to be put into a blog at some point. But here, and with more detail at the state level, but here just to orient you toward this, we're looking at job postings to get a sense of where we are in the recovery. It's a leading indicator because you only post a job ad if you believe that your demand will remain or increase. Or on the other hand, you take job ads off if you're not going to need those employees anymore. So in this slide, here, we're looking at the actual job postings. This is pre-COVID. So we use the historical data over a couple of years to predict what job postings would look like if we had no COVID. So if COVID did not occur, this is the prediction of what job postings were expected to look like without COVID-19. And for those of you who are interested, it's the seasonality that really is giving us the best way to predict this, especially some of the big holidays are driving the predictions. So now this orange is showing you the actual job postings with COVID-19. So here in the US, with the latest data, we're seeing that we're coming close. We're only 11% off where we would be if we did not see COVID-19. So again, good news, we've seen job postings drop. The biggest drop was 47% from where it was expected to be, and now we're starting to see it climb. Again, this is telling us that sectors are getting better. Looking at this across the whole US, and for this, I'm looking at information from May 10, and again, we're looking at the same sort of chart as you saw on the previous slide for the US. So how much lower than expected job postings are we in all of these states? The lowest one is Louisiana. It's only down 1% from where it would be expected to be at this time. Iowa only down 5%, Kentucky only down 8%. But on the negative side, on the East Coast here, we've got New York, who's still 40% below where it should be in terms of job postings, and Virginia, 41% below where it should be. And then on the West Coast, Oregon down 40% from where it should be, Utah down 40%, and Nevada down 41%. So wide variation in terms of where we are in terms of job postings versus where we would expect to be. Now here I just picked out a couple of states, and again we'll be putting out a blog on this, and this is for the week of May 17th. So we're coming forward 1 week from the slide I showed you of all the states together. And notice that here Ohio is now 3.1% above, so 1 week forward from the map, 3.1% above where they would expect it to be. You saw the drop off, and Ohio again was one of those states that was quick to close down. Nevada, you can see showing the greatest drop, down 59% from where they're expected to be. And Hawaii, you can see, is the furthest away from job postings where they're expected to be. And of course, tourism being so important over there, and also only being able to get to it by airplane, is having an adverse impact on the region. So just showing you those few states, and again, we'll be getting on a blog where you can go in and look at your own state. Here in Alabama, you can see that we've seen a decline at greatest about 44%, and now we're close, 8%. On this next slide, we're looking at Connecticut, where the drop was 46% again, but now we're still 25% below where you would expect job postings to be. New York, 54% was the biggest variation from where you would expect to be in terms of job postings, and they're still 20% below expected job postings. Ohio, some very good news. You see them 3% above, but here you see during the depth of the COVID crisis, they were 50 to 52% below job postings where you would expect. And Virginia, this one's kind of interesting because they seem to have maintained 40% below, 40 to 48, 43 to 48% below expectation for most of the period, and now down 28% from where it would be expected. And then finally, Hawaii, some in the 50s here for much of the time, and now still 32%. And here you can see going into the season where they typically would see a lot of postings, adding people to the workforce because of the tourism season. Now, switching gears again to the occupational impact. Here, again, we're relying on job ads because they're we can get this information down to the county level, down to the MSA state level, and they're a proxy for occupation demand, and I'll get into some occupations in a minute here. But you can see the big drop off here, a 46% drop off in job postings as we went through the worst of the COVID crisis or COVID recession, and now we've seen a 67% increase, and very encouraging here over this past, between May 10 and 17th, we've seen a 25% increase in job postings. Again, good news pointing to the economy starting to perform better. Now on this slide, we're looking at the occupations at a high level. So the Labor Department, again, uses, this one is SOC code, so a 2-digit SOC code is a very high level. And here we're looking at 3 weeks of data. The week May 17, actually we're looking at May 17 compared with the average of pre-COVID peak, the 3 weeks that were just before pre-COVID. So the way to read this is we have 3 occupations or 4 occupations where job postings are actually greater than they were previous to COVID-19 starting. And for example, here, personal care services. So that would be salons, barbershops. And the reason why that may be higher, they were hit very hard. And it could be that some of the workers who may be at risk to coronavirus are not willing to come back to work yet. And so these places are having to put out ads to get more workers to come and fill the barbershops and the salons. Some others that are up is healthcare practitioners. This would be nurses, doctors, dentists, and healthcare support would be nurse assistants, home health aides, pharmacist aides. And then here, production occupations, mainly serving the manufacturing industry. On the other hand, Architect and engineering, the ads are only 60% of what they were pre-COVID, and that may be because many of those people stayed on the job. They were able to work from home, and so we're not having to see a lot of replacement like we did with some of these other occupations. Um, Looking more specifically at just the one area that we're seeing a lot of decline, arts and entertainment, recreation workers. In blue, we're looking at the pre-COVID average, and then the data for the 1st of March, for the 3 weeks ending with the first week of March. And you could see the big drop there, amusement, recreation, with a lot of the um, amusement parks closed right now. Lifeguards are down significantly. Recreation workers, ushers, lobby attendants, gaming dealers. So clearly, high school kids and college students are most likely having a really hard time this summer finding jobs, part-time jobs or internships. And now to show you more specifically what some of this looks like, this comes from our job postings in Jobs EQ. We spider sites every day, deduplicate, and then we post this information. And here I pull just lifeguards, ski patrol, and other recreational protective service workers. And you can see that actually right now, the latest data, 436 in gray is where the postings were last year this time. In blue is where they are now. 436 last year, 330 today. But at the worst point in March, the week of March 25th, we were looking at some 954 ads across the US last year compared to 216 this year. Another sort of fun one here is dog walkers. So in gray is dog walkers last year, and blue dog walkers this year. And you can see a lot fewer dog walkers this year. There were more than 500 last year this time. It's hard to see here, but this actually is not zero. That's 56 dog walkers, ads for dog walkers across the US. And we can drill down and see specifically what the ads are, and we could click further and actually look at more detail on the ad. But this, again, for fun, I was looking at some of the ads for the dog walkers here, the employer, their location, and this one in New York City. Some of them pay fairly well. Here's a dog walker with canine cardio, gets paid an average wage of 52,000. That's pretty good. Some of these others, again, above 20,000. And you can see some of them in Northern Virginia, a lot of them in Northern Virginia here, 1, 2, 3, 4 in Northern Virginia, and here in Ohio and Tennessee and Denver, where job walkers are still in demand. Contact tracer. So this is a new occupation, or at least not a new occupation. It has been around before, but never in demand like it is now. So as of this past week, we had 1,500 ads across the U.S. for contact tracers, and I would expect over the next week or two, this is going to go up even higher as states have started to announce that they have funding available to hire more of these people. In terms of what occupations are being required, here you can see medical secretaries, computer support specialists, some of them RNs, social workers, and on down the line in terms of the type of occupations that are being required. And then I also did a search on when we pull our job ads, we save all of the information as text and allow our users to do searches and look at various information on those ads. And so I just searched on the word temperature in the ads. And here you can see again, here's last year, the ads that had the word temperature in them. And now here this year, many more ads that have temperature. Interesting, the type of occupations. The top 2 occupations 154 were ushers, lobby attendants, and ticket takers, and number 2 was security guards. So in particular, these last 2 occupations and all the occupations that we've looked at here in more detail give us an idea of how much this COVID-19 is changing our society, and hopefully just for a short period of a year or two. And then IT occupations, for the most part, have been in demand over this entire period. And again, here's gray as last year, and you could see for the most part blue this year occupations that require cyber have been and continue to be in demand with an increase there. Here's the type of occupations, and then we can even drill down and see what firms are requiring these cyber skills. And not surprisingly, you're seeing a lot of defense companies at the top, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, but also interestingly, we have some big consulting firms, Ernst & Young and Deloitte, who are looking for cyber type skills. Now, I'll answer questions in just a minute. Let me just conclude, though, that this crisis will end. The national economic outlook, we're looking at sharp and short, but not sustained in terms of GDP. The supply shock, we've gone through this phase where all citizens were asked to stay at home, businesses were closed, but we're seeing the states lift those restrictions and the economy is opening up. Not all industries are fully operational. The vaccine, if it comes sooner than mid-2021, we'll see the employment coming back a lot quicker than third quarter 2022. And we're seeing great variation in terms of the regions and occupations and industries. So with that, I know that there are some questions here, so I'll go back to that. Let me see here. First question on U1 to U6. Rory, could you please reiterate, define what dropped out of the labor force means when they mention and describe these unemployment rates? Okay, so the unemployment does a survey. They call you at your house. They say, are you working right now? No, I'm not working right now. Are you looking for a job? No, I'm not looking for a job. If you're not looking for a job, you don't even get counted in the unemployment numbers. So they ask you, okay, are you working right now? Yes, I'm working. Are you working part-time? Yes, I'm working part-time. Would you prefer to be working full-time? Yes, I'd prefer to be working full-time. If you say, I'm working part-time, I prefer to be working full-time, that qualifies you as U6. And the other piece of U6 is I haven't looked in the past, I believe it's 10 to 12 months. However, if you were to offer me a job, I would take it. So hopefully that answers your question on what U6 means. And then the next question, what was the difference between U3 and U6? And hopefully I gave you that answer to that. Carol, do you agree with the U.S. Labor Secretary saying that unemployment rate may be back below 10% by the end of 2020? It depends. If we see a scenario where we see some treatments, or if we see a vaccine by the end of 2020, yes. However, otherwise, no, I don't see that. I see getting below 10% maybe mid 2021, but on the employment side, it's going to be much slower than on the GDP side. More questions. What was the estimated number of jobs lost without the PPP? An additional 5 million jobs. And again, you'll get a copy of these slides and you can look at that more specifically when you get it. So an additional 5 million is what we're estimating jobs would have been lost, or 5 million jobs saved because of it. We have been seeing a wide number of expected people going back to work. You said 78% from this report. Which report does this come from? Unemployment insurance. So when you file for unemployment insurance, you answer a number of questions, and of course it's self-provided information. So some of these people who said, so we expect to be put back on the job, they ask, were you laid off temporarily? Were you furloughed temporarily, or is it a permanent layoff? So unemployment insurance provides that information. They collect all kinds of other good information, but it varies by state. So they'll ask you what your highest degree level is, what was your last occupation, what was the last industry you worked for. And during the Great Recession, it was interesting in Northern Virginia, which has a very high education level. There was a higher percentage of PhDs laid off, or a higher number of PhDs than some of the lesser people with lesser degrees during the Great Recession. Taxes. What's your take on the short-term and long-term impact of federal stimulus packages? Someone will have to pay for this. Do you see a spike in tax burden? Well, as the economy recovers and comes back, we're going to see the federal deficit come down rather quickly, similar to what we saw after the last recession. But yes, long term, my expectation is that we're going to see taxes going back up at some point in time to pay for this. But short term, it was a necessary thing to do. Otherwise, this economic downturn would have been a lot more severe. Another question here on job postings. Is the increase in job postings now a result of calling back workers, whereas previous job posts were based on business growth? So are the numbers really comparable? Yeah, that's a good point. So some of it, so for example, the cyber is based on real growth, although some of that cyber is probably based on COVID as well, because we've got a lot more fraud going on right now. So banks are hiring, other companies are hiring to try to reduce fraud. But you're correct, especially with regard to the services, barbershops, salons that I was showing you earlier, where they might see a short-term pop in demand because we didn't get our haircut for quite a while, but some of those people are probably at risk who are working at the barbershop or the salon, and so they're refusing to come back, and so they're having to get replaced with those postings. Carol asked a question about reshoring. Reshoring is one thing that can boost manufacturing, but what about automation? What's the view on investments? So whenever we go through a recession, we see a boost in investment and an increase in productivity. And this is especially true if you're starting to see wages going up. So actually, the CARES Act is giving people who are laid off $600 a week of unemployment insurance on top of whatever the state pays. So Virginia, for example, pays about $350. So some individuals are getting $950 a week, and they can get it for 8 weeks. So some of the lower skilled, previously lower paid workers are getting paid more to be at home on unemployment insurance than to go back to work. So I bring that up with this question because there's greater reason to now start to put more money into stores without cashiers, or stores with less inventory clerks, or to have more mechanization at the warehouses instead of individuals there. So typically we do see investment increasing to be more productive during recessions. And yes, clearly some of the jobs will be coming back to the U.S. Because of reshoring. Anne asked, how will the current social climate, property damage to businesses by protests impact the recovery of COVID? Yep, that's another good question. So some of these, we are not taking that into account in this forecast. So especially it's going to hit hard some of these restaurants, some of the small businesses that were in areas where the protests had basically demolished those stores. So my expectation would be that it's going to cause the recovery to be slower and a bit below the numbers we're showing here. But again, the bigger driver will be if we get a vaccine sooner. But as we get more data coming in the weeks ahead about the amount of damage, we'll put that in our forecast as well. The other big question is how much will that cause, if any, a spike in the spread of the virus because of all the people that have been in so close proximity to one another. And then we have some questions on vaccine virus. What is the source of your information about the vaccines? Here, if you have a jobs EQ person that you're working with, a admin person, if you can tell them to ask me that question, I could send you the sources of that. But basically, the media and different epidemiologists, what they're saying in terms of the expectations, what we've seen in the past, and what's in the pipeline for now. Roger is asking about the efficacy of vaccines is well less than 50%. Is there an expectation that COVID-19 vaccine will somehow be different? And there again, it varies based on which vaccine you're looking at and what company and what they're saying. But if you have a question, then want to send it by your account manager, I'd be glad to get you our sources there. And then Anna, are these numbers considering a second wave? No, these numbers don't consider a second wave in the fall. So second wave again would be more of a worst case scenario. We did have a worst case scenario like that we ran about a month or so ago. So again, if you have an account manager and you're interested in seeing that, I could get that back to you. Okay, let's see, are there any more questions out there? Okay, I'll hang around for a few more minutes to see if there are any more questions. Certainly, thank you for attending today, and we'll continue to put out these webinars as we get more information. I do see there are a couple more questions coming in. For those of you that are hopping off, though, be safe. And let's go back here to the questions. All right. Let me check one more time. All right, questions. Mike, if it's going to take years for some industries to return to normal, do you see a substantial shift of labor leaving certain industries permanently? Well, no different than any recession that we've been in. Certainly, as if your job is not there, then and you want to work, then chances are you're going to look for alternative industries to work in. So I would say yes, that you'll see a lot of labor moving around from one industry to another, and perhaps even a lot of individuals going back to community colleges to get reskilled. If you think about it, people that are unemployed now have 8 weeks of time off where they're getting paid around $1,000 a week, and this is a great time when they can be going back to a community college in that time period and picking up a new trade. Another question, companies are reporting low wage workers are refusing to return to work as long as they get that extra 600. Do you expect a spike in employment when the 600 stops? Yes, I would. And in fact, it's interesting, economic studies show that when the extended unemployment is coming close to the end, that week prior, we see a spike in individuals starting to find jobs. So yes, there are studies out there that support that view. Do you anticipate companies adding more or new internal positions to address safety concerns or outsourcing this? Um, I would think that the larger ones could. I think it could go either way on both of those. But I've spoken to some people at a company called ServPro, so they do disaster recovery, and they said they've been very busy in terms of some of it going into shops that are starting to open up to sort of fog it, so that they can make sure that it's particularly clean. So those clearly that kind of thing that you need some expertise in, I would expect to be outsourced. If it's something like temperatures, I would expect that might be something that's not a new position, but like we saw on some of those job postings, it's a skill or something that gets taken on, a task by the security guard or the person who's working at the uh, the opening of the where the office is. And then we have a question: any data on contract opportunities? Do we see an increase for contract roles, contracts? As in 1099, that would be a temporary worker, and I would say yes. And typically, when we're coming out of a recession, firms who are not quite convinced that the economy is going to continue to grow, that demand is going to be there for their goods or their services, they will hire through a temporary help agency, so that if they have to then let someone go, it's easy enough to let them go. They understood it was temporary. But then if the economy continues to grow, then they hire the person on full time. So yes, I'd expect to see um, temp growing right now, temporary positions. And then another question: when you listed the occupations that will grow or are growing, what's included in production? So that could be welders, that could be machinists, electrician. That could be some that's related to construction. Um, so that would be sort of the trades that you would see also in the production area. And then what is the expectation for entertainment like theater, et cetera, in New York? That's something that I haven't done a lot of research around. I would expect that's in one of those areas where we don't have it coming back until well into next year. And again, one of those industries or sectors where having a vaccine is extremely important. Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for attending this session. And if there's anything we can do for you, please reach out. We'll continue to have these sessions as we get more information. And if you have an account manager with Jobs EQ and you need additional information, please reach out to them and have them reach out to me for whatever your additional needs are. Thank you again. Be safe.